Welcome to the deep dive. You're here because you want to get past the headlines, really understand the important stuff.
And that's what we do. We dig into the material you're interested in, pull out the key insights, just for you.
Okay, so today we're diving into an article from Written Shout. It came out May 2025.
That's right. The title is How Does Digital Reading Kill Deep Thinking by Mishinef.
And our mission today is basically to unpack the arguments in this piece.
Yeah, looking at how the author sees our reading habits changing because of, well, digital life.
And what that might mean for how we think, maybe even for society.
Exactly. We're focusing just on this one article today, getting its specific viewpoint.
All right, let's get into it. The article kicks off by kind of reminding us how things used to be.
It paints a picture of the past, right? If you ask someone back then what they were reading.
They'd probably mention finishing a book or reading the newspaper cover to cover, maybe a magazine article.
Yeah, it was a different kind of engagement. More focused, maybe, more contained.
Definitely seems that way. And the article contrasts that pretty sharply with today.
Oh, absolutely. Now it's just a constant stream, short messages, headlines flying by, social media posts.
So much text all the time.
Enormous amount. And here's a key point the author makes. We might be reading thousands, literally thousands of words daily.
Okay.
But then the question is, how many of us can honestly say we've recently sat down and really deeply read something long, like properly engaged with it?
That hits home, actually. I know I spend ages scrolling, feeling like I've read a ton. But ask me about the details of a long article I just skimmed. Often. Not much there.
Exactly. The article uses the phrase scattered and fleeting for this digital reading style.
Scattered and flitting. That sounds about right. It's worlds away from that focused attention we used to give books or long articles.
And the author suggests a pretty big consequence here.
Which is?
That this constant shift, this habit of quick skimming, might actually be, well, eroding our ability to handle long, complex texts.
So, like, our brains get trained for the short bursts.
Kind of. We get used to that fast pace, that constant switching. So when faced with something needing sustained focus,
it feels harder, like a mental workout we're not used to.
Precisely. It can feel like a real effort, a cognitive hurdle, the article calls it.
Which brings us nicely to this idea of deep reading. How does the article define that?
Well, it's presented as much more than just seeing words on a page. It's about reading longer things.
Okay.
With accuracy, with real focus, and with analysis, going beyond just skimming the surface.
So digging in, looking for connections, understanding the nuances.
Exactly that. Truly immersing yourself in the meaning.
And the article makes a direct link between this deep reading and critical thinking.
Yes, a really crucial link. The argument is essentially that deep reading is the foundation for critical thinking.
How so?
Well, the ability to analyze information properly, to build logical arguments, to see the strengths and weaknesses in something. The article claims that ability is tied to our capacity for deep reading. So if deep reading declines,
our critical thinking skills weaken too. Makes sense.
And that potentially makes us more vulnerable, to just accepting superficial information without questioning it.
Yeah, I can see that. If you're only getting snippets, you're not really digging into the why or the different sides of things.
Right. And then the article broadens the scope, looking at social consequences.
Yeah.
Specifically, empathy.
Empathy. How does reading connect to empathy?
So the article references the work of Steven Pinker, a cognitive psychologist.
Okay.
And the idea put forward is that the rise of long-form reading in the past, novels, biographies, actually helped cultivate empathy on a wider scale.
Interesting. What's the mechanism there?
By immersing yourself in a novel, for instance, you're stepping into the characters' lives. You're experiencing their world, their feelings, their perspective from the inside out.
Okay. So you're vicariously living their experience.
Exactly. Some neuroscience research even suggests that when we read narratives deeply, our brains simulate those experiences, activating similar emotional regions.
Wow.
It's sometimes called narrative transportation. You're transported into their world, and that helps build a richer understanding of how others feel and think.
Which maybe the quick-fire nature of digital reading doesn't quite allow for.
That's the concern raised in the article, that fragmented style might not provide the same depth of simulation or understanding.
So it's like that deep dive into someone else's world, fictional or real, helps us connect emotionally.
And the argument is that this practice spills over into real life, helping us understand and empathize with actual people around us.
Okay, I follow.
But the article warns, if our main way of reading becomes this short, superficial digital style,
We lose that immersive practice ground for empathy.
That's the potential downside highlighted, yeah. It could lead to interactions becoming more superficial, maybe a reduced grasp of human complexity.
And this superficiality. It seems like the article suggests it affects how we process information generally. It mentions cognitive simplification.
Yes, cognitive simplification. It's this idea that we start boiling down complex issues into overly simple, sometimes misleading sound bites.
Well, the complex political debate getting reduced to a hashtag or a meme.
Exactly like that. You lose all the nuance, the different facets, the trade-offs, all for something easy to grasp quickly.
Even if it's not really accurate or complete.
Precisely. And the article connects this tendency to some pretty negative societal outcomes.
Such as?
Things like populism potentially rising, increased social polarization, maybe even a general decline in public trust.
Because we're not engaging with the complexities anymore.
That's the suggested link. If our ability for nuanced thinking fades, we might be more easily swayed by simple, emotionally charged narratives and less able to have productive discussions about complicated stuff.
The article also touches on the brain itself, right? Neurological aspects.
It does, which is fascinating. It suggests our brains might literally be adapting to this digital environment.
How so? Adapting.
Well, through neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and reorganize. The idea hinted at is that constantly engaging with quick digital info might strengthen the brain pathways for rapid processing and switching attention,
Okay.
but potentially weaken the pathways needed for sustained focus, deep reflection, and analysis.
So our brains could be optimizing for skimming, potentially at the cost of deep thinking.
That's the provocative suggestion being explored. It's not just habit. It might be changing our neural wiring over time.
Wow. And what about the platforms themselves? Does the article mention their role?
Yes, it does. It points to platforms like, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram,
Hmm.
and how their algorithms often favor content that's short, punchy, maybe emotionally charged.
Easy to digest and share quickly.
Right. While more complex, nuanced posts might struggle to get the same visibility, it's a system that can kind of accidentally discourage deeper engagement.
And that has political implications too, I imagine.
Definitely. The article mentions research suggesting voters might respond more readily to simple, bold statements, even if they lack substance or accuracy.
Which leads back to that Steven Pinker quote mentioned in the article.
Ah, yes, the warning. Whenever politicians start to speak simply, we should be worried, because this is usually a prelude to dangerous decisions and even war.
That's quite a stark warning. It really makes you stop and think.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
But look, the article isn't all doom and gloom. It does offer some suggestions, some strategies.
Okay, good. Strategies for what? For getting back to deep reading.
Exactly, for consciously trying to revitalize it in our lives.
So what does it recommend?
Well, one key thing is about being intentional with our time, like actually scheduling time specifically for reading longer texts,
Not just trying to squeeze it in between notifications.
right? Making it dedicated activity.
Okay, good.
Another suggestion is to consciously try to reduce dependence on only digital reading. Pick up physical books, print out longer articles sometimes.
Does reading on paper make a difference?
The article implies it can. There's often a different quality of focus, maybe fewer distractions involved with the physical text.
Interesting. Anything else?
Yeah, focusing on quality over quantity.
Meaning?
Meaning it's better to really engage deeply with one or two substantial pieces than to just skim, dozens of superficial ones.
Mm-hmm.
Prioritize understanding.
Makes sense. Depth over breadth.
Mm-hmm. And finally, it talks about taking more control over our media and social media habits.
Ah, the Alice scroll.
Exactly. Being more mindful of how much time we spend there, maybe consciously limiting it to create more mental space.
Space for what? For deeper thinking and reading to actually happen.
That's the idea, creating the conditions for it to flourish again.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. This deep dive into the article highlights a major shift.
Yeah, a shift from focused, deep reading of long texts
towards this more fragmented, superficial way we consume digital text now.
And the article argues pretty strongly that this isn't just a neutral change. It has potentially big consequences
For our critical thinking skills.
for our ability to feel empathy.
And even for the overall health of our public conversations in society.
Mm-hmm. The author's conclusion is quite powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's that rediscovering and actively preserving deep reading isn't just a personal preference.
It's vital.
It's presented as vital for keeping society informed, analytical, and empathetic.
And that final thought is pretty sobering, too.
Yeah, the idea that if we lose the ability to read deeply, we might ultimately risk losing the ability to think deeply.
Yeah. Okay. That definitely gives us, and you listening, a lot to chew on.
For sure.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener. Take a second to think about your own reading habits day to day. Where does most of your reading time actually go?
Mhm.
And maybe just consider what's one small thing, one little step you could try, maybe even starting today, to consciously bring a bit more of that deep, focused reading back into your routine.
It's definitely worth reflecting on. A good place for some personal exploration.